Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm delighted to speak to sports psychologist Dr Hillary Cauthen. Hillary, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you.
Super excited to have you on. We're going to be talking all things sports psychology. You've written a book. I'm looking forward to unpacking that a little bit as well. But I'd love to know a little bit about you and a little bit about your work.
Yeah, wonderful. So I'm a clinical sports psychologist based in Austin, Texas. I've been an entrepreneur my entire 18 years now going into the field. Not planned, but that's where we went in. I specialize in mental health, specifically within the athletic and organizational wellness domains of sport and performance. I have a wonderful team. We've grown to 6 interdisciplinary providers in the office. So they range from mental performance consultants to sport therapists to sports psychologists. So it's a wonderful blend of what the field looks like, how the providers can impact our teams, our individuals that come into the office. I have a podcast, Highs and Lows of X's and O's, that I'm excited that we started in July of 2024. And it really fits with the passion of breaking down the stigma of mental illness in sport and really normalizing the person within the player and the humanity aspect of sport. And that ties into the book that I have, which is Hello Trauma, Invisible Teammates. So I do a broad things of running a private practice, being a thought speaker and leader and podcaster in the space, volunteering, give back to the organization. So I'm the incoming president-elect of the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. So leadership and giving to the community of the field is so vastly important. But my most important job is probably being a mom of 4 beautiful girls. So that is the biggest take that I have, an impact I have of raising these wonderful young women in my household.
That's incredible. I'm kind of envisioning you using all of your techniques on yourself to be able to manage yourself through the busy schedule that you no doubt have.
Yes, absolutely. And teaching them and helping them be better than me and learning all the things is just, it's a daunting task, but I love it.
That's extraordinary. I'd love to take you back. Why sports psychology?
Yeah, I'm sure my story is not that far from a lot of people that get in the field. I've been an avid athlete my entire life. I was a competitive youth athlete. I think the one caveat that was fun for me at 14, we moved from this big city outside of St. Louis, Missouri, to this really small town in Maine, where I kind of lost all these resources I had, all the clubs and the extracurriculars and the access to things. And winning became very easy for me, and that lost my joy. So it's kind of this irony of like I was winning so easily and I was like, this is not fun, and how do I handle this? And then there's more external pressure of expectations from the small town and the community where everyone kind of knew and expected what I was doing. And I experienced my first injury also after being very successful my freshman year, and I was like, man, I wish I could talk to somebody. Like, I wish someone could know my brain. And the best part is my mom is actually a counselor. So I could have had access to counseling or mental health, but my brain was like, no, I need someone who knows this competitive aspect, this side of me that is different than what I knew traditionally mental health and anxiety and depression. So I knew at 14, my mission was to be that person for athletes. I had no idea how I was going to do it and what it was going to look like. And at the time, going into my educational studies, the pathway was not as easy. So I got every degree possible to maybe fit this continuum of the job I wanted to have. But I knew at 14, that's the vision I was going to do, is to help athletes and, just be there for them in a way that was different than what was traditionally kind of set out to be in the resources we had.
You knew at 14 what you wanted to do. Your path was ahead of you. But at that time, did you actually seek out? I mean, you mentioned your mother was a counsellor. Did you actually seek out a sports psychologist or a counsellor for work with them, or did you kind of just make your way through some texts and books to be able to help yourself?
No, I struggled silently for a long time, and it got worse, right? When I competed in college, and then I had a new culture and a new experience, and was suffering even further when I was studying these things at an entry level in undergraduate. And it wasn't until my sophomore summer, going into my junior year, my third year of my college, where the men's coach, actually, we used to have coffee. He was a lifesaver for me, and he gave me a book, and he's like, "You need to read this book." And I still didn't have access to anybody, but I read a book, and it was a game changer. And it allowed me to accomplish the goals that I had and to work through that. And I actually never started seeing my own therapist until later into adulthood before I even became a mother. Like I was doing all the things I would not recommend anyone in this space now. Partly for resources, partly maybe pride, partly just thinking I knew all the things what I didn't know.
I've got to ask, what was this book you read when you were a student athlete?
Okay, yeah, I tell everyone it's In Pursuit of Excellence by Terry Orlick.
Of course. A classic.
Mhm.
A
A
classic,
classic,
right?
yeah, yeah,
A classic. Mine at that age was, because I was a professional golfer, mine was Dr. Bob Rotella's Golf is Not a Game of Perfect. And
yeah,
that I
absolutely.
think both Terry and Dr. Bob and probably Robert Nidifer and Jim Loire, all these people from that era, we read those books, right, and that got us hooked on this area.
Yep.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And if you were to, I mean, obviously you read In Search of Excellence, and I've read this as well. And if you were to be able to talk to your younger self, when you reflect back on the specific challenges, I mean, obviously, feel free to share what you would like to share with us when you reflect back. What conversation would you have had with your younger self? I mean, for me as a 18, 19-year-old professional golfer, firstly, I was far too young to play professional golf, but I'd certainly be starting with, even at the basic level, just focus on your routines, work on your confidence here, better practice, and all the traditional kind of stuff. What kind of things would you be saying to yourself, your younger self?
I first would just instill some positive self
Yeah.
belief, like some really good affirmations of like, I believe in you. Like, go get the goals that you actually have. I was so stuck that, and I know all of us get in this place, but I was so afraid to fail that I didn't actually allow myself to chase after my goals that I had
Mm.
for about 2.5 years. And what I thought was hard work, what I thought was the drive to like push myself was actually just doing the status quo and the good enough things. I wasn't focusing on my nutrition and my rehab and all the routines that I would have done. I was actually probably starving myself. I was a distance runner and a collegiate cross country and track runner, and I wasn't getting educated and I wasn't seeking support and I was suffering. I was not enjoying my life. And I thought I was working really hard. And once I allowed myself to actually say, this is the goal that you have, and let's figure out what does it take to get there, and start doing things differently and effectively for my body. I had to learn what my body could do. Then I was able to accomplish a lot more.
Well, thank you for sharing. And I know that we will have many people listening in, many coaches around the world who will have heard you say you're a clinical sports psychologist. And I know many of them will say, well, hang on a minute, there's a sports psychologist and there's a clinical psychologist, but you are a clinical sports psychologist. Can you sort of describe to us that pathway briefly?
Yeah, and I could traditionally say a sports psychologist, and that in the States would do the same, but I definitely put clinical in because I do specialize in mental illness and mental health in sport. And I am trained as a licensed psychologist. But I also have 6 years of kinesiology sports studies training that allowed me, and I am a certified mental performance consultant. And so I really like to say I work on this continuum of care model. I work with an athlete, ideally on helping them optimize their performance. But a lot of the specialty in the nature of the athlete might come in with mental illness or mental health concerns. And we're doing some preventative work to reduce the symptomology and reduce the diagnostic that they might have of anxiety, depression, some trauma. So I differentiate saying I am specialized as a clinical psychologist. I will treat that mental illness and any performance domain to get them back into the optimization of their life, their well-being.
Is there a simple divide here? And please excuse my broad brush question, but is there a simple divide? Is there a sort of a percentage share between those who arrive at your door from a mental health perspective versus those a performance perspective? Is it kind of 50-50, 75-25? Again, it's a bit of a crass question, but I'd love to know myself.
For sure. For those that come see me specifically because of that differentiate, I probably would say 90% are on a range of wanting mental health, mental illness support. And I get a lot of high athletes that are adolescents, and the parents are like, hey, we want our kid to go to therapy, but you specialize in sport, you get their brain, this is a great avenue, and it's an entryway. It sounds like fun and exciting, right? Sports psychologists, whether you look at Wendy from Billions, the TV show, or Dr. Sharon from Ted Lasso, it's like relatable pop culture. So they like bring it in. But us externally to the public is a lot more. We go work with teams, we do talks. It's very much performance work and performance optimization and the culture building beyond the mental illness.
You've mentioned earlier this idea of a stigma around mental health, mental illness in competitive sports. People turn up on your doorsteps to talk about what kind of experiences that they're going through.
Yeah, the highest thing we see is anxiety and depression, and especially in the adolescent athletes, and in the states where we live in Texas, being a place that is predominantly known for very high athletics, high academics, the pressure to succeed. There's a lot of high achieving perfectionists in this space, and they're overworked and overloaded. And so, part of the work is just helping them slow down and redefine and rework through their labels, the negative things that they have around this idea of perfectionism, and helping them build their self-worth and self-belief. Those are the two most common things that we'll treat. We also see some significant trauma that might occur that comes post work, that comes in, that we work through as well, on a deeper level. But yeah, anxiety and depression are the two most common things that show up.
And what's your thoughts on that stigma currently? And you might correct me here because I might be wrong making these statements, but my understanding, and I'm heading right the way to the very top here, the franchises in the NBA and the NFL. My understanding, it's been some years now that there's been a mandated mental health professional within these franchises, and so there feels like there's some barriers breaking down. I mean, every day I seem to go onto X, and there's a fairly prominent athlete talking quite openly about their mental health, quite openly about some of the tools, techniques, strategies they might use to manage themselves. I mean, it feels like we're slowly knocking on the door and breaking that door down.
Yeah, I would say, like, when I left saying I never thought I'd own my own practice, and that's because when I came out in 2013 as a professional, no one wanted a psychologist. Nobody was going to talk about mental health or mental illness. And I was like, well, I'm going to just do my thing then. And, thankfully I knew I wanted to work in that space. So I just created it. But it wasn't until about 2016 we saw the NCAA in the US for the universities that started looking at mental health best practices. And it was really the professional athletes, Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan, Michael Phelps, in this shift of 2016 to 2018 start speaking out. And Naomi Osaka that we saw in the Olympics, and Simone Biles. Like, there has been a shift in the past almost decade now of high profile athletes kind of pulling out of sport, talking about things, which then allowed the collective bargaining agreements in these pro sport spaces to require that. It's not at every professional level yet. Like, I think the MLS still doesn't have it in their required base. I'm not sure if the NWSL has it, but NBA, NFL, NHL, MLB, they've all worked around these protocols to have providers in space. What that looks like is still barely cutting the surface, right? It's not full time. They might not be embedded. Maybe it's one type of provider, but not the whole continuum of care model that we look at. So it's an entryway. um, with that model, it's beautiful, but we're not at a point of like welcoming it to utilization yet. Like, some players still don't trust the system. So they're going to find someone else outside of their organization for support, which is beautiful if they still do that. But we're not at a place where it's like, you had one strength conditioning coach before, and now you have five, right? And everyone's utilizing them and going to them for their physical therapy and personal training and strength conditioning. Like, we aren't at that place yet. I would love the next 10 years where it's a commonality that you have three providers in different specialties and domains that is just a part of this athlete's performance domain.
Do you think that's possible? Do you think it is possible to have those three providers in one organization offering support for athletes? I'm guessing that's performance, mental health, well-being. Do you think that's possible? Do you think that then that kind of provision gets a little bit muddled and confusing for those key stakeholders within the organization?
I think it's possible if we stop shifting the focus just on the athletes and actually look at the organizational system at a whole, like coaching,
Yeah.
education, coach support, front office. Like everybody needs this support system in different domains. So I think if you actually allowed the organization to experience in the front office and the coaches to get that work as well, then they'd realize, oh, the benefits that this can have for my athlete also. And, and I've seen that in some ways. I've been a part of that. I've been a part of some organizations that have had that model, and it's beautiful when it works. But it really comes down to money and leadership and what you believe in investing. And unfortunately, when leadership shifts, the support staff that's been with them might shift also, and you lose the job and you lose the systems that were in place, and you have to start from scratch again.
Where do you love to support an organisation, if you don't mind me asking? I know as I've grown in experience, whilst I'd love to work with individual athletes, and I still feel an organisation can benefit, the team can benefit from my support for an individual. I truly believe that working with and through coaches is absolutely critical, but intervening, as you've mentioned, at a systemic level is vital, because you can hit so many individuals, not I suppose with as much granular detail, but you still feel that you can make an influence. So that's sort of my bias there. But where do you feel comfortable or excited about intervening?
Yeah, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have been like direct player care, and that's all I
Yeah.
knew. That's where I was my safe zone, right? But when I actually got to do the work and I saw how the systems worked at three different levels, I'm a systemic thinker, and I really do love the foundational culture building with those key stakeholders, with the front office, with the coaches, and being that liaison and building a program that is same language synergy across the system. I think it's beautiful and it works well, and then you can bring in other providers to do that direct player care, and bridge the gap where if you are doing that coach system building. Yeah, it's beautiful when it works that way. And unfortunately, sometimes you're the only person. So you have to do the duality dance of, okay, how do I have the trust? I call it trust versus the confidentiality piece. How do I have a trusted relationship with the coach and a trusted relationship with the player? And what does the bridge look like? And how can we make sure that they trust in me, that I'm here to support everybody with the same mission?
How do you do that?
I am transparent and I'm open, and I say this is what we believe in, this is what we're doing, and here's how I support people. And if you're coming to see me, like you're believing in that process. And there's things that I'll outwardly say, and then there's things that we keep safe internally in the closed doors that we work through.
I love the idea, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. A traffic light type system, and again, this is very broad. This isn't going into any details, but I've always felt that the performance psychology piece in as safe and as healthy environment as one can create, the performance psychology piece for me is the green light. I would
Mhm.
love in any organization for everybody to be all in on performance psychology. So in essence, you don't necessarily, and again, broad brush statements here, taking out nuance and complexity. You don't necessarily have to engage in too much confidentiality. That ideally we're very open with each other, from coaches to players and back again. And then maybe you might suggest that the day-to-day well-being piece is more the amber, whereby, obviously we're starting from a position of confidentiality as a sports psychologist, but being amber, there might be more of a conversation about where we need to share this, and then obviously the mental health,
Mhm.
the serious mental health piece is obviously firmly in the red.
No, I love that idea. And I think this is kind of when I go into organizations and have had opportunity. This is where I think people get it wrong, because they go right into wanting to do the work. And I'm like, hey, let's create the system, and who needs to know what information? Because there are certain things in the system, like the medical providers, the medical director in the sports science domain has to know what's going on with their medical health. And they share it with certain people. And mental illness falls in that category, that I would agree that that's no different than a specific injury, a surgery. We have to share, especially if there's medication. So you have to know the systems that are in place that are more, okay, red light is these very specific cases. Here's the people that have knowledge of this information, and to what extent do they have to have the knowledge from? Here's the yellow zone. I love that, which is, hey, maybe this is like a private conversation. We don't want to be out on the pitch when we're talking, but we want to come in here and just have you have some one-on-one time. But we're not ashamed that I'm going in to see somebody, like. And then the green light, I think absolutely, it's at the breakfast, coffee chats, it's doing team talks, it's on the sidelines, it's on a bus, it's wherever it's at. There's no shame in talking to the provider that's there. But I think it has to be two ways. The coach and the athletes also have to kind of be open and using the same language of like, hey, this conversation I had with Hillary over here, like we really shared this stuff and this is what we're going to bring into it, where it's a team approach and the purpose is clear. And so before you ever do a work in a system, you have to define the systemic ways and know what's important and what's ethical and what's best practices. And then you get to go do the work. And so I think that model's beautiful. I mean, should be celebrated to walk in and learn from people and talk about it and have that space. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time and trust to build those spaces.
And sometimes you're not necessarily given that time, are you? And that's the
No.
catch-22.
Yeah.
Honing in on that systemic approach, and probably a slightly unfair question here, because obviously, again, every organization is different and every individual experience is different. But you mentioned earlier that so much of your work from a clinical perspective is helping athletes around anxiety and depression. You mentioned that idea of, a high achiever's tendency towards perfectionism. They have perfectionist tendency, often not all of them, but some of them. And that's often that's the area that often sparks experiences of anxiety, possibly depression, experiences of depression. With that in mind, when you think about intervening at a systemic level, and obviously we want to work with and through coaching staff, we're going to work vertically across departments. We're going to be working with sports scientists and medical officers, physios, etc. What kind of conversations do you have there around helping them to help athletes manage their extreme thinking, the extreme emotions they experience around performance? Because I think this is a really important link between well-being, mental health, and performance. It's the athlete's extreme thoughts and experiences and emotions of got to perform, got to win, that can spark that anxiety and depression. Yet at the same time, you've got coaches going, yeah, but I want them to win, and I want them to want to perform, or I want them to want to win. And it immediately makes me think of achievement goal theory. Can we help them be task driven rather than outcome driven? What kind of conversations have you tended to have there?
Yeah, I think part of this is the awareness building and actually saying like, hey, the essence of sport is win and loss. We know that. The essence of professional sport or collegiate sport, now that's become more professional, is about wins and losses. These are the metrics. Your job relies on this, your money relies on this. We're going to name what is already there to be true. And once you name that, then it's like, okay, we already know what the goal is. Let's now break down what is important for how we get there and the values that we know will lead us to getting to those outcomes. And so, of course, you will have your traditional, like, this is our standard. And I want every team and culture you work in to have a standard of expectations. The standard is to maybe make playoffs or to win a championship. Like, yes, set your standard, but the focus is the values and the systems of how you get there. And part of it is creating like what we do, preventative nature, right? So if we know that we have high pressure performance on a Saturday for playing, I'm going to make sure Monday is going to be a day where we're talking about recovery and mindfulness. And we're going to set up places and environments that implement these skills in the system that we say this is important to us. And we're going to have in the system team time and conversation and connectivity and the cultural piece on top of the technical tactical play. And no different than building your technical tactical competitive systems on the performance, you have to build that same model with the mental and emotional well-being of like, what are the important skills to teach them here that get them to perform their best in that state. And so mirroring the same way in the same language and then creating a model around that will allow them to just integrate it into their systems more effectively.
I love what you said there, and I'm going to try to break down and reflect back what I've heard. I love the fact, Hillary, you've started with that idea of normalizing winning and losing. I think in sports psychology we can sometimes be a bit guilty, and I know I'm guilty of this, of process, and it's kind of, yeah, but let's start with what people want within the organisation, which is, we're looking to try to win and we're trying to avoid losses. That's the essence of our participation at that level, as you said, college level and above. what you did there is you broke it down to values and systems. I'm sure there's more words you would bring in, but I love that idea. And you talked about organizations being preventative in terms of their behaviors and their language going into high pressure situations. When I think of behaviors and language, what we say and what we do is very much, almost for me, the definition of culture. No question, just a reflection back at what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes work, and I love it when systems get it. And I think my piece is always these athletes and coaches have always had a stem of what mental skills is in the work. They're already doing sports psychology work without having the proper labels around what we would teach them. Sometimes they just have bad form or bad technique, right? So I get an athlete who shoots funky when his foot, if he's a soccer player, and it's like, oh, you just learned bad technique your whole life. Well, you learned bad goal setting. Let me help you reframe this a little bit, right? And I can make it better for you. And so they're the experts already, and using their language is so essential. And using where their motivational style is. Like, I'm not one who, as much as I know research and theory tells me intrinsic motivation and the drive and the pleasure will have longevity in the activity. Sure. But I also know if you are motivated by an outcome externally and you want money or fame or status or the bonus at the end of the year, I am going to use that fuel because that is your gas right now. And we're going to go all in on that motivation. And eventually we will lead to more enjoyment. But like, I'm cool with where you're at.
What you've said at the end there, sort of linking intrinsic motivation with extrinsic rewards, I suppose, is a way to describe that. I love that, and I love the idea of connections. I'm a big fan of, say, goal achievement theory, connecting ego orientation to task orientation, or, as you've said there, in self-determination theory, connecting extrinsic rewards with intrinsic drivers. How au fait do you think coaches, I suppose your side of the Atlantic here, are with that? Because there's so much, I must be honest, when I jump online, a platform like X, and there's so many wonderful videos shared of these incredible college coaches, especially, but professional coaches as well, from NFL, NBA, MLB, NWSL, WNBA, to name a few, who talk so eloquently about this stuff. Has your experience been that they're really, there's so much more education around this, and they're much more au fait with these kind of connections between intrinsic and extrinsic, task and ego, that they're really learning these things from, hey, sports psychology?
Yes, I think there's way more educational material around there. And I do think, one, the shift to what we saw in the system is to coach at a certain level now, you have to have a master's degree. And so a lot of these coaches went back and they're interested in sports psychology. They're interested in knowing that. I think advantageously, they would love themselves if they could bring someone in, but they know their role as a coach has always been a parental figure, a counselor in a nature in some way. Like, they have to know that knowledge. So I love when coaches take this on and realize, I do have I have to educate them on the mental and emotional side of the game as well. And I can't just speak the words anymore. I have to do the talk. So I think there's a shift. I would love a shift for more coaches to get proper education and actually utilize services themselves. Because the pressure that we put on our coaches it's just monstrous. It's so extreme, and especially at different levels, and the turnover rate and the moving and the impact it has on their own personal systems, like that takes a toll on someone's mental well-being and mental health. And you can see that on the sidelines when you look at a coach and you're like, I don't think they've slept in probably 3 weeks. So I really hope that our field that is listening, or coaches that are listening, can understand, like, this is a tool for coaches. This is absolutely, you need to have somebody who's in your corner to help support you.
Let's pause the button on that, because I think that's really interesting. My experience has been, because these coaches are so driven, so ambitious, sometimes I feel it's led to a blinkered approach. Not everybody, and again, broad brush statement, but a blinkered approach in terms of they feel they have to take control of everything.
Mhm.
And so actually so often the solution, not the only solution, but one of the solutions, is actually to help them to delegate amongst their staff and trust. That I'm thinking of delegation and trust, quite organizational terms here, rather than necessarily sports psychological. But what are your experiences there? I know coaches put themselves under so much pressure, but my experience has been, if I can help them to actually trust and delegate a little bit more, then actually they can turn down the volume of stress and anxiety a little bit.
Yeah, and I think for me, when I look at these systems, right, I look at all these MBAs and MLB and MLS and collegiate. There are so many other external coaches, assistant coaches, different roles, player
Yeah,
development coaches. I think that the head coach is put on the pedestal that they're the one who's in control, and ultimately they are the decision maker. They have this control, and that's why all the pressure is placed upon them. My fear is a lot of these coaches actually isolate away from their team and their system, and they need to integrate a lot more, and they need to listen a lot more and hear what's happening, because they are the face of it. And so they might do a really good job delegating, but they're not delegating with synergy, and there's not the synergy of the same thing. And so then we see the reactionary approach of, when a problem steps in, then they're going to change the whole system and they're going to say things, and the media gets involved, and then we see that kind of being catastrophic for them.
absolutely. And as you're speaking now, I mean, everybody listening in, I've spoken to quite a few academics on the subject of professional judgment and decision making, PJDM for coaches, and I think that's so critical when you are with your coaching colleagues and you're trying to make effective decisions, and doing that with colleagues, I think, is absolutely critical. I love what you said there. Moving on, you got a book.
Yes.
Hello Trauma, Our Invisible Teammate. I love that title. Let's dive in here. Let's talk a little bit about this book. Give me some highlights.
Yeah, it's actually like a perfect segue because it fits exactly what we're
I did
talking
that on
about.
purpose,
So,
obviously, Hillary. Clearly,
of
clearly.
course,
It
right?
wasn't an accident at
Um,
all.
uh, the book stems from a TEDx that I had done in 2018, which was the toxic culture of sport and athletes' mental health. And so I had started speaking out about the areas we talked about, of how the culture of sport is impacting athletes' mental health and well-being in a way that's detrimental to them. And part of that is the system that exists within it. And so, being from 2018 till 2022, when I decided to kind of write this book, I had observed and worked in different systems and experienced different things. And it just sparked this innate fire inside me of like, I am tired of hearing the conversations behind closed doors or the sideline whispers. Like, I'm going to publicly say the things that need to be addressed. And so I wrote this book, Hello Trauma, Our Invisible Teammate, which is a fun juxtaposition because you're actually like, anyone who's been through trauma doesn't want to be like, hi, this feels great. And every chapter is like that. It is, if trauma had a similar stages of grief and loss, it's the experience of what a victim would go through, of hello gaslighting, hello minimization. These are the chapter titles that exist. And the first half of the book, the first 12 chapters really are emotionally inviting you in to experience what trauma would feel like, and then psychologically break down the meaning behind it, and helping someone who has either been through it or someone in their life who's witnessed someone go through something to emotionally and psychologically define and understand what trauma is and help them make meaning of it. And then the second half is a call to action where I use sport as a microcosm of society, showing how it reinforces trauma to exist and how these cultures and institutes need to be better in reducing the trauma and the pain that causes in these systems when we get it wrong.
Magnifying the first half of the book, you mentioned the experience of trauma. I mean, my ears prick up when you say that. How have you tried to bring that alive for the audience? I'm assuming that you've used some case studies. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the first whole chapters, every chapter starts and ends with a journal entry. And so, and it's like on this random day. So you're kind of imagining, and they're all different people. They're all different things, right? They're like Rebecca, Sarah, John, doesn't matter. And it kind of says like day 22. So it's their person's experience of like the day since once the trauma has occurred to them. And it starts with a journal entry that evokes that emotion to be like, oh, what am I experiencing? And what's going on in this, reading the story of someone. And then you get the science behind it and the breakdown of it. And then you end with a journal entry that kind of brings it back together with a different entry. And so all the journal entries, they're not linear. There's no timeline of trauma, right? Because that's the essence of healing. Like it goes back and forth of day 22 to day 512 and then feel like day 3. So there's no linear form. It's just a journal entry of the emotion that connects to the chapter of the experience and makes meaning of it. And then I write a journal entry to my readers that then brings them into the next phase of what the book's going to be about, where I say it's kind of my call to action. So it's fun.
And in that second part of the book, and maybe we can frame this here for those coaches listening in, because I know, again, many coaches listening in won't necessarily have a whole host of support staff. They won't necessarily have the support of a sports psychologist next to them. So a deeply unfair question, so please excuse me, but for those, and I know they'll go out and read your book, but what kind of things might those, let's call them grassroots coaches, what kind of things might they consider within their coaching practice, within their coaching culture, that can help them best influence the mental well-being, the mental health of their players?
Yeah, so there is a beautiful on page 135, if you read the book, there's a beautiful 7-step outline to help them work through things, which is beautiful. But the essence that they're going to learn about is the importance of empathy and empathetic engagement, and seeing like I always kind of my catchphrase is the player within the person, bringing the humanity of sport, and understanding. And this is the most important thing. That step model is actually a decision-making model of how you handle situations that occur in your system, in your organization, on your team, with transparency, with authenticity, with care. And so it's an approach of, if a player comes to a coach with something that's going on in their life, and most often they might in certain ways, and coaches have to figure out, how do I handle this situation? What do I work through? This is a step guide on how you can handle a situation, whether it's a player-to-player conflict, it's a parent-to-player, it's an external thing. No matter what the severity of the issue is, it's a guideline to teach coaches how to actually navigate and handle situations in the best way to influence mental health and well-being and care for the person. Removing biases, removing the judgment. It tells you hey, these are languages and words you can use that will help someone feel seen and heard, which is the essence, what every human wants, the psychological safety and security. And you'll be able to create that environment in the system.
Well, firstly, having written 4 books and having just completed my 5th book, I'm very impressed that you remember that 7 steps is on our page 135. I don't think I could do that at all. But putting you further to the test, 2 minutes, give us a very quick rundown, if you're willing to, of those 7 steps, or take a couple of steps, pinpoint them and talk us through them just briefly for a couple of minutes.
So I would say, thinking through the most important part is first, with, like I say, empathetic engagement is one. So can you actually listen and engage in understanding and hearing both sides, whether it's someone that a player reports something happened to them by a different player. You're going to have to listen to both players, and you're going to have to know that I'm going to have this with care and non-judgment and hear the facts, and that what is your role in that? You're not kind of the authority investigator. You're just there to listen and to understand and see what they need. The next part of the decision-making process, the steps, is being transparent, authentic with the timeline, telling people the process of what's going on and what the steps are to handle it and help with the outcome. Oftentimes we never follow back up or say, hey, these are the steps I'm going to take, or this is what it looks like to get to this outcome, or here's where I'm at with this outcome. So there's a lot of steps around, how do I follow through? How do I take action? Another important part is seeking resources. So you might not be the expert to handle this. So how do you get resources? How do you get to the outcome that's needed? And those are just the main 3 for sure. And I think if I could give any tidbit beyond the empathy, it's always come with authentic care and transparency back to, hey, here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm going to do. You're not sharing the confidential piece, but you're letting the person know, you are following through with things, and here's when they can expect stuff, because that will reduce the anxiety in what the athlete or the person has shared with you, so they'll know that you're actually following through on things.
I absolutely love all those points, and I know I would learn loads from those 7 steps. And you speaking about empathy makes me think of episode number 68 of the Sports Soap Show with Dr. Stephen Rolnick, who you will know from motivational interviewing. Absolutely fantastic work from him, and I love the fact that that's number 1 for you, because I think that's a skill that so many coaches are very good at, but could improve a lot on. So that is very, very revealing there. Hillary, absolutely fantastic. What a wonderful conversation. How can people find you, follow you, get in contact, and just as importantly, find and purchase your book?
Yes. So I'm pretty active on social media, especially Instagram. So Dr. C Mindset posts a lot of just informational, educational, fun clips and videos. On LinkedIn also. So trying to put stuff on there as well. You can find me for highs and lows and X's and O's. Right now we have that streaming on Apple. So if you're interested in it, or on YouTube on the Controlled Chaos Network. So you can watch the video on Controlled Chaos Network, or you can download on Apple. And then the book, Hello Trauma, Our Invisible Teammate, is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or Audible, where I am the narrative. So you can hear me read it to you, which is also very fun.
I haven't braved that one yet with my own books, but fair play to you, well played to you. Look, I'm really excited to read that book, and I know everybody listening in will be as well. So, Hillary, thank you so much for today.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via X or Facebook, or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. If you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.